What's up, guys? Welcome back to the ELI 5 podcast. My name's Kyle, and this episode is not sponsored, but sponsored by Hedgehog Markets. Prediction markets on Solana. Go check them out, hedgehog.markets. You can also stake with our validator. And speaking of validators, today we're going to be talking about a recent proposal that has been voted on by validators and was approved at, I think that's 77% voted yes. However, only 50%, I think, of the total votes were actually sent out and actually voted on the proposal. But SIMD stands for Solana Improvement Documents, and this was SIMD-0096, just the way to count them. And what was this improvement document for? It was for priority fee burn amount. So right now, the way Solana works is there is a base fee, and this is just a small nominal amount of SOL that you pay on every single transaction that you do on chain. So for these transactions, 50% of that base fee is burned, 50% goes to validators as a reward. Similarly, priority fees, these are fees to prioritize your transaction. And they decided, basically when priority fees were added or implemented, that same thing would happen. 50% would be burned, 50% would go to the validator. So this improvement document takes that 50% burn and sets it to zero. So couple I guess significant changes here, or I guess residual outcomes from this change, right? It's one change, but basically, what does this mean, and why did this come about? So why did this come about? So let's start there. The reason that this was, I guess, proposed is because right now what can happen is if I want to get my transaction prioritized, I can add a priority fee. So let's just give a quick, easy to understand example just for math's sake. If I wanted to prioritize my transaction, I could say, all right, I'm going to pay a 1 SOL priority fee, right? A huge fee. But what happens is the validator that prioritizes and processes my transaction, they would only get 0.5 SOL, and 0.5 would be burned. So what people were doing is basically setting up side deals. Side deals is where you would go to a validator and say like, hey, these are all my transactions. When they come through, I want you to prioritize them. But instead of putting an on-chain priority fee, because I don't want to pay 1 SOL, I'm just going to give you on the side 0.75 SOL. So they set up these side deals that obviously aren't viewable on-chain. Now you could probably do some chain sleuthing and see payments, or you could even do these payments off-chain. But the idea is that I could pay a validator 0.75 SOL and say, hey, just prioritize my transactions. There won't be a priority fee. But here's 0.75 SOL. So the validator is getting 50% more SOL, right? So instead of getting 0.5 SOL, they're getting 0.75 SOL. And from my perspective, instead of paying that 1 SOL priority fee, I only have to pay 0.75 SOL. So I'm paying 0.25 less. The validator is getting 0.25 more. So it's a win-win from like a financial economic perspective. However, this now doesn't really show up on chain. So this transaction happens and can be prioritized by the validator who's the current leader without needing that on-chain priority fee. So that's kind of like the rationale or the reason for potentially doing this. The other side, though, is that now validators in theory are a malicious actor, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be a validator. Anybody could do this if they wanted to, but I don't know why you would if you weren't the leader. But basically, it's called basically you're faking priority fee levels. So the way priority fees work right now is when somebody comes to use hedgehog.markets and you're placing a transaction, you can choose whether or not you want to have like a fast priority fee, a turbo priority fee, right? And all we're doing is we're looking at what are the like sort of recent priority fees that are being paid, and then taking those to calculate what that priority fee should be. So the priority fees are kind of dynamic, right? They ebb and flow based on the demand on the chain currently. And so we're constantly calculating that every time a transaction is getting placed, basically. So people could maliciously inflate these priority fees, driving up fees being paid to the validators. The reason this doesn't happen right now is because in order to inflate these priority fees, you have to add an actual priority fee to a transaction so that it's visible on chain to calculate it higher. So let's just give another quick example. If I am a validator and I'm in the leader slot, I could basically add a couple of transactions with really high priority fees. And because the idea is that the burn will go to 0%, I will basically just be paying those priority fees back to myself. So I would get the priority fees back. In the meantime, I would be inflating what the priority fees look like. And then if I'm the leader after that slot as well, then people are like, oh, look, priority fees have been like 5 SOL. So it would get auto calculated to 5 SOL. Some user would pay 5 SOL. And then me as the leading validator would get 5 SOL in the priority fee. So this is a potential like malicious way of like things that you could run into. Now, the caveat there is I don't know if there are potentially better ways to calculate priority fees or ways to calculate them based on like transactions that are coming from different places, right? So the reason that this doesn't happen now is because if I'm a validator in the leader slot and I try to like inflate these priority fees, half of that is getting burned. So that means I need enough transactions in the next block with a high enough of a priority fee to make up all of the priority fees that get burned by me trying to inflate them. That's why it doesn't happen right now. So a little bit of nuance, but just something else that came up in arguments of people going back and forth on this stuff. And the last like key thing that I guess really could play a bigger role later on is just the overall economics of Sol itself. So similar to Ethereum, if you're not aware, Ethereum and Solana basically have the exact same tokenomic model. They are proof of stake networks. Some amount of SOL and ETH is issued to validators in every block, I believe. And then some amount is burned based on the current like demand and usage of the chain. So both of these chains can be inflationary or deflationary based on the demand and how much is being burned at any time. And to that point, by getting rid of this 50% burn to priority fees, one thing to note is that right now, 90% of the current SOL being burned is due to the priority fee 50% burn. So if we take this down to 0, then the amount of SOL being burned will basically decrease by 90%. This isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's more just a thing. This could still be overcome by just base fees and that 50% burn on the base fee that I mentioned. However, it will obviously take a lot more transactions happening just regularly in order to get to a high enough burn rate to even get anywhere close to what we're currently doing. Same thing, if we increase total TPS and total priority fees, that would just mean even more is being burned. So I think it's a little bit preemptive to do this big of a drastic change, but obviously it could always be reversed later on. This implementation also won't get implemented for quite a while now. I want to say it's going to be a couple months before this even gets introduced. So for now, priority fees will keep being burned at a 50% rate. So not much will change in the shorter term. But yeah, we'll see how this plays out. That's what SIMD-0096 is. I hope this was helpful. If you have any questions or if I misspoke, please let me know in the comments. But if you enjoyed it, please give it a like, share it with other people. And yeah, until next time, guys, thanks for watching.